Thank you very much, and good afternoon to everyone. As already introduced, my name is Frank Makamo. I am from the South African Bureau of Standards. Quite often when I stand up and talk about localization, people get confused because they have known the SABS as the standard body that developed standards, and a standard body that checks quality and put a stamp of approval on products. And there is a bit of disconnect when you therefore saying, I am going to talk about localization, and people then get to say, but where does SABS fit in when it comes into localization? I'll give you a bit of a background of where it all began, and probably take you through of what has happened over the past few years, to be exact, over the past 6 years, in the development of this local content verification department housed within the SABS. As you would know, the SABS reports directly to the Department of Trade and Industry, which has been entrusted to ensure that localization does take place in this country. And I'll get to share with you the reason behind this policy. There has been a lot of debate right at the beginning of the introduction of this policy, which was at the time driven by the then former Minister Pravin, who was at the helm of the National Treasury. And purely the main objective of introducing this policy was looking at how can government leverage on the public procurement space, using the trillions of rands that government spend on a yearly basis in supporting our local industry. So that's what gave birth into this local content verification policy. As an overview, as I said, it all began in 2011 when the then minister at the time asked us if we could put together a standard that could guide those who would want to comply to local content in whatever they produce in the country, so that when government want to spend, they can channel their procurement spend into those companies that are producing products locally. So in 2012, we were then mandated as the South African Bureau of Standards to develop and establish a department that will be mandated to then go out and verify, especially where somebody says, I am a local content manufacturing company, or I am producing my products locally, because that is the deciding factor in terms of how do you then support such entities that are producing their goods in the country. And in doing so, the idea or the perception was that if you have local companies producing in the country, automatically it translates into job creation, because the more government spend to those companies that are producing their products locally, the more they create jobs for our people. I think it goes without saying, I think all of you sitting here, you're quite aware that we're probably facing one of the biggest challenges when it comes into unemployment. So that was the reason behind the establishment of the local content verification office within the SABS. And obviously the objectives were quite simple. It was looking at ways and means of how can we support the economic growth and job creation, support the industrial innovation and technology development, and also support the broader economic empowerment through the creation of black industrialists, and leverage the public expenditure and developed and stimulating local manufacturing capacity. And I think those who are in the manufacturing space would agree with me that we've seen a lot of companies shutting down, not because they did not know what they are doing, but because they were faced with competition coming from outside. Competition is a healthy thing, but it becomes a bit awkward when we as people of this country decide that we're going to spend all of our money from products that are coming outside. So we've got to find a balance somewhere, especially in a country that is challenged by unemployment. It's our tax that is being used by government And the question is, how best can you utilize this money that you're collecting from these people to support job creation? And obviously the local guys would say, if you can guarantee that a certain portion of what we produce, you will get it from us, automatically that will translate to the local guys creating more job opportunities for our people. That gave then a process where we then said, so because this policy is focused on public sector, how do we get to a situation where we decide which products are going to be procured locally, mostly by government? And a process was put in place where you've got a group of people that will go around and do research to try and identify products where this country has got capacity to produce and supply the demand that we may have as a country. And you will see these products later on that we know that we have capacity as a country. We have companies that can produce these products. The question is, why are we not buying from them so that they can then create jobs to deal with the unemployment rate that we're looking of? So that's the process. Once this process has been finalized, it then gets presented to the minister and say, Mr. Minister, on this particular product, our research shows that this country has got enough companies that are producing this particular product in the country. And if these companies can be supported, it will probably go a long way in these companies creating jobs for our people. Just to share you with some of the products that have been designated as we speak for the past 5 to 6 years. These are products that were designated specifically for government, that government has no excuse to buy these products from other countries, because the research has shown us that locally we do have people that can procure, that can produce these products. So I'm not going to mention them one by one. It's a very long list. But probably, I'm sure as you're sitting here, you're probably thinking, why are we then having most of these products that you see here coming from that country that I'm not going to mention by name, if we have people that can produce them in the country? Yes, we do have capacity here, and I'm sure there are people sitting amongst you who are saying, I'm one of those who are producing one of the products that are appearing on the list, and I hardly get business from government. We have a policy. We just need to move into implementing what we have. And if we can do this, government spend no less than 1.2 trillion a year in terms of public procurement expenditure. If a portion of that can be spent locally, we can begin to eat on that 27 or 28% unemployment that we're currently facing as a country. So these are the products, as I said, I'm not going to, but I want to zoom on one that comes or glaring at us. If you look at number 8, which is furniture products. The idea here was that if you look at the amount of offices and buildings that are occupied by government, and I'm not going to dwell in that, somebody will say, but they are burning and they are catching fire. That's another debate. But if you look at those buildings that are occupied by government, and you say just for 1 second and saying, if the furniture, right from national, provincial, and local, if those 3 spheres of government can adhere on this policy that thou shalt not bring furniture to government offices from outside, you're going to buy it internally, because it shows here that for school furniture, we've got enough capacity, we've got enough companies that can produce school furniture for all the schools that are being monitored and managed by government. Why do we then see school furniture coming from outside the country if we've got capacity? Then we get surprised when that school furniture manufacturing plant located in South Africa shut down. It is shutting down because nobody's buying from them. And yet we have a policy that guarantees that school furniture will be bought from locally. So that's where the pain then comes in, that if we have such a brilliant policy, why are we not implementing it? Why are we helping other countries to create jobs in their own countries, and yet we're sitting with a high rate of unemployment in our own country? The next slide shows the second batch of products that have been designated. As I've said, these products were designated so that the procurement departments of the various government entities can use this as a base when they are procuring, that for these particular products, we don't need to go outside because we can get it locally. And you can see how clever the research was done, where we could see that the capacity, it's not enough. You would see that we know that this product, in order to be completed, you need to get certain things from outside the country. And obviously, you will see the percentage, it will probably say 70%, because we're quite mindful that it will be impossible for anybody producing that particular product to complete it with materials that are being produced in the country. So it is a bit flexible that you say, where we know in terms of the research that we do not have companies that will produce a final product using local content materials, we then relax the percentage compliance into a figure that will allow those companies to say, if you can show 70% of local content, we understand that you're probably getting the 30% from somewhere, but that's good enough for us to procure from you as a local company. So these are the number of designated products as we speak. Every now and then, companies do approach the DTI. I'm from a meeting just now where we were talking to the cement industry, where they are putting an application asking the department to designate cement as a local product, therefore meaning that the projects that government will be embarking on, can they be given priority in terms of procurement of that product? So that's the idea behind that. And we know that if that can happen, if we did that probably during the World Cup preparation, and we procured everything that we use in the building of those stadiums, you can imagine how many people from locally that would have got jobs. And if we can continue to do that, we will begin to reduce that high number of unemployment rate in our country. What pains a lot of people when I present this slide, people begin to connect the challenges that this country is facing. If you look, for instance, on, I think it's the previous slide when I was showing, if you look, for instance, at number 17, when we're talking about rail signaling system and associated components, and then you look at the billions of rands that the country has put forward for both our Transnet and PRASA institutions to rebuild the locomotives and the trains that are currently running in our township. And then you're saying each of these entities got no less than 50 billion as an investment. And the idea was that rail stocks and anything associated with that, 60 or 70% of that should be procured locally. We now know that that money is gone. But has it been spent in the country, or has it been spent elsewhere? It has been spent elsewhere, and we've assisted another country to develop or to establish jobs so that their people can actually get jobs. 100 billion, it's not a small change. If we used that money and said a lot of what's going to go through in these locomotives into these trains, let the materials and everything and the components be procured locally. At least if we can say 70% of these billions must stay in the country, it would have allowed people like you who are in the manufacturing industry to benefit from such investment, that you would have been guaranteed that you will get an order, and getting an order means you have to employ more people, and employing more people, it means you're beginning to reduce your unemployment rate. So in a nutshell, this is what gave birth to the local content verification and the policy behind it. I am a bit comfortable that yes, we may have wasted 5 years or 6 years since this thing has been established. My comfort is that the brain behind the local content policy, which happened to be Mr. Gordon Pravin when he was still at National Treasury and in charge of the purse of this country, he is now in charge of these entities that should be supporting the local content. And I'm pretty sure that local content and making sure that whatever money is given to state-owned enterprises, a big portion of it should be spent locally. I'm very comfortable that finally we will probably have somebody that will drive this local content And in doing so, we will begin to see our local manufacturing probably rising up. If you have looked at this list, you would have realized that we have leather, textile, and clothing, which is 100% local content, which means there should be no hospital, there should be no state-owned enterprises that is buying protective clothing, whether it's safety shoes, whether it's uniforms for police or defense force or for correctional services. In terms of this policy, those things should not be procured outside. But I don't know how many times have you seen people wearing things that have got that label says made in that country that I'm not going to mention. So if government can spend just on clothing, leather, and textile, and you look at the billions that are being spent on an annual basis, the textile industry that we destroyed in KwaZulu-Natal, that used to be the best in the continent, you will probably see it coming back. And coming back means those people who lost their jobs 10 years ago will have to be recalled to come back and get their jobs. Just one little decision within a government department, procurement space, making a decision that in terms of local content, anything leather, clothing, and textile, I have to make sure that I give priority to local manufacturers. That will go a long way. Where do we then come in as the SABS? It's on the verification process. We then had to design a way on how do we then advise, let's say, those departments who are willing to support local companies or companies that are producing their products locally. So we had to come up with a process, and in this case, this process was focusing on public expenditure because it was designed around government. And I know I'm standing here in a mining space where you're talking mining, and I know that you're quite aware of the mining charter that is still in draft. You will see the connection to this process when we get to that later on. When we designed this, the idea was that any winning bidder of any tender in a government state where local content is required, that winning bidder will then be handed over to the SABS so that we can then verify you have won the tender, where are you going to get the product? The idea was that if we then present a report to government that, oops, we have now verified the company and we have realized that 60% of the product that will be supplied to you as government will be coming from outside the country. Automatically, that will say you can no longer continue with that bid that you have won. So that's the idea around that. And I know you'll probably have a lot of questions but we've seen tenders being given to outside companies that are producing elsewhere, yet we see on the list that should have been given to a local. That's the challenge that we are facing. As I've said, I'm hoping that the current minister who is in charge of the public enterprises will probably zoom into that space. And if we can get the Auditor General to begin to audit state-owned enterprises and say, let me see where you're procuring products. Are you procuring from local companies as per the policy, or you're making your own discretion? Because that in its own, you can then begin to see where the problem of corruption and fraud is coming from, because you then understand that if people are not following this policy, it means tenders are not given on the basis on how well you can produce the product, but it's given on the basis on how well you've paid or how well you've influenced somebody to give the business to your way. So that's the process, and I'm not going to take you through it line by line. But this process was designed to ensure that if you were producing one of the products that I've indicated, I will then deploy the auditors to come and check if indeed you are producing the product locally. I can share you stories of things that horribly shocked me, where people on paper would say, this cap is produced somewhere in Soweto. When I deploy my auditors to go and verify, you realize that the caps were procured from that country, and there are 3 people whose job is to cut the labels and replace it with a label that will say made in South Africa. these are things that are happening, but I get frustrated when it is done by a South African that is aware that what I'm doing now, I am denying somebody who's actually making these caps locally an opportunity to make more and employ more people. So that's being greedy and selfish, that I'm going to buy them from there and I'm going to cut the label and replace it with my label and then present it as if I have produced it myself. But we've got mechanism through this process to catch you, because we will ask for invoices where you got the material, where you got this, where you got this, and somewhere, somehow, it will come out that actually you have no input in the producing of these caps. They came fully prepared for you. All you're doing is to replace the labels and sell it as if it is your own. Now, let me park the government policy and then zoom in the next few minutes that I have on the local content in the mining industry. And I'm quite aware that it's still a draft, but when one reads in that draft, as a person that has been involved with the local content, when I look at what the draft is saying, I'm saying, oh my goodness, I hope the mining sector can do better than the manufacturing sector, because if what is there, if maybe it becomes published, maybe with minor changes, I am hoping that this sector will probably do its best to make sure that it doesn't become a document. It becomes a document that is implemented. And I'm quite happy that it has taken time for this document to be published, to allow all of us to give our comments, so that when it is finally published, we cannot turn around and say we don't recognize that document. It should be a document that we all say we had our contribution. All what is left now is for us to implement it. From a distance, coming from outside the sector, what I've picked up from the draft that I've read is that the enterprise development and local content are key instruments to achieve both competitive and transformation of the mining industry. It also presents opportunities to expand the economic growth that allow to the creation of decent jobs and widens the scope for market access and South African capital goods and services. That's what it says at the moment. I don't know with the comments and the submissions that are being made, but from a distance you can see that this is the key driver. This is the intent, and how do we then turn this thing into reality? And it's not that we need to go elsewhere. We are decision-making people in our own space. I always say when I go to government departments that it takes a procurement manager to award business to somebody who is not producing a product in the country and deny our own people to have an opportunity to get jobs. It takes just a manager to make that decision. And I said to myself, what do mining rights owners have to do to achieve this? And again, I derived it to the draft mining charter. These are probably things that you are familiar with, most of you, that what it says at the moment when it comes into procurement and enterprise development is that 80% of the total spend on services must be sourced from South African companies. 80% of the total spend on services must be sourced from South African companies. Again, I don't know whether with the comments and what's going on, whether it will stay like this or it will change. But whether it changes from 80 to 70, it is still a percentage that we need to make sure that it becomes a reality. Whatever percentage we end up agreeing with, it's a percentage that, as the industry, we will have to make it happen. And if we do make it happen, it will go a long way in resolving some of the challenges that we are facing as a country. And it gives the breakdown in terms of where are we actually looking at, and 60% of the total services budget must be spent on BE and entrepreneurs, of which 10% of the total services budgeted must be spent on BE women entrepreneurs, and of 51% youth-owned and controlled enterprises. 10% of that should be spent on BE compliance companies. So this is what is currently appearing on the draft, and you are probably versed on terms of where we are with that document. But it goes down now to the second point of the procurement spend, where it says 70% of the total mining goods procurement spend must be on South African manufactured goods. And then it gives the breakdown that 21% of the total mining goods procurement budget must be spent on South African manufactured goods by black entrepreneurs. We can debate until the cows comes home. It's not going to resolve our unemployment issues. We know the challenges that we are facing in a country. You look at those stats, you're thinking, that could be my cousin that is being counted there. All of us, we can probably write 5 names of people that are related to us that have been looking for jobs for the past 3, 4, 5 years, and they're not getting anything. These are people that when they put papers on the table, and they will tell you that to keep myself busy, I just continued studying. I now have 5 degrees, hoping that maybe one day, somebody will give me an opportunity to get an employment. But some of these people, they then lose hope and say, in the absence of job opportunities, I will try and make a plan. And making a plan is what we obviously see in the country. It's painful when we see videos of small children being addicted into drugs. It's painful when we see that, robbing a cash in transit car has become a hobby. And then we don't drill down and say, but what is influencing this? So we have lots of people who are sitting at home that if you were to put a gun on the table and a little bit of money, because there's nothing in the stomach, people are bound to say, if I can get 20 rand and be able to feed my kids, I will do it. And it's upon us who's got the opportunity to make these difficult decisions, that what contribution as captain of industry that we can make in order to begin to deal with this unemployment rate. Otherwise, we are sitting on a ticking time bomb. We can put all the high fence and electricity fence and the alarm systems. It's not going to make crime go away. What's going to make crime go away is when we begin to focus on the implementation of these policies. In a nutshell, that is in the draft. What we then come in here is when we have to come and verify whether those who are expected to comply to this are really complying. That's where SABS come in. I have now to send my auditors to say, is this really happening in practice? And my auditors will then go through everything and then confirm that this company has complied with the requirement of localization in the mining sector. And when one looks at the rationale behind the use of local content requirement in the mining sector, which is similar to any other resource-rich countries, you then see that the motivation, I've put 3 bullet points, there might be many, that the motivation is the paradox of plenty, that is the unacceptable high prevalence of poverty and inequality amid the abundance of resources that we have as a country, and also to try and mitigate and manage the social and political risk due to the rising expectation domestically for a better and more equitable distribution of wealth. And I think we've seen quite a number of communities starting to voice their grievances through strikes and all sorts of things, to saying, how can we benefit from those who are doing business in areas where we reside? What contribution do these companies do in order for us to be uplifted as a community within or around where the mining activities are taking place? And I believe, as an outsider, that probably this was the rationale behind trying to come up with a policy that will deal with that. As I said, it doesn't matter how you look at it. If you are a South African, this picture talks to your cousin, to your brother, to your sister, to your relative. They are actually probably in those numbers. It's a picture that no one can be proud of. I always say it's easy to debate it when we are in front of television, But it's another thing when you face those people who are reflected in those percentages. And you ask yourself that when I'm driving to work in my fancy car, there are people sitting in that 27.2% who, when the sun rises, they don't know when the next meal is going to come from. I mourn and bitch from my employees that you're giving me less increase and less what. There is somebody who's got nothing, zero. And that person has to leave. And that person has to send his children to school, just like I send my children to school. This is the picture that should keep us all worried. This is the picture that we should all be asking ourselves a question: what can I do as a manager, as an MD, as the CEO, as the executive, as the board member, to begin to change that picture? It is not going backwards, it keeps on increasing. More and more people are becoming unemployed. Some clever people say if you have such a picture in your country, the simplest way of defining it is that you are sitting in a ticking time bomb waiting to explode. I don't know how much time we have as South Africans for that time bomb to explode. For me, it's no longer it's a ticking, it's a matter of when. It's almost there now. When you have such a high number of people in a country that are looking for jobs. We've tried to intervene with social grant. It seems it's not working. You've got to have people to work in order to try and deal with this. I'm not going to dwell on the pictures. You all hear about them. You all read about them. It's up to us as South Africans that these are policies that are being designed or developed to try and begin to deal with that. Whether we are in the public sector, whether we are in the private sector, if we can all join hands, I am definitely sure we can begin to move forward as a country. Some of the challenges that I can share with you in closing, there are good companies, ladies and gentlemen, that have done so much in making sure that they support local content. But there are many that they've said it in my face: sorry, Frank, we're not going to implement this. This is for your government. Let them do it. I'm running a business here. I want to make profit. And you do experience such attitude. It's even worse when you get it from the public sector, where you know that the initiator of the policy was somebody from government, and his idea was, if I can spend a little bit of this money that I have in the country, it will go a long way in supporting the local manufacturing. And these are the things that we have experienced where state-owned enterprises will deliberately ignore the policy that has been put in place. And as I've said, I hope the mining sector is not going to follow suit. You will probably find a way of making sure that you implement this thing. Some organization will tell you in your face that I do my own declaration. I can tell you what you see here is 100% produced in the country. So what more do you want? And obviously you would know nobody can self-declare and say, I am bringing this product from other countries and I'm just assembling here. And some people will say, sorry, I've been exempted. I don't need to comply to this policy, but if you ask for the documentation of exemption, they don't get presented to you. And many of state-owned enterprises, rightfully so, from what we're seeing in this commission of inquiries, auditors have been chased away that you are coming here to check who is doing corruption. We're not going to allow you to see that. Now I understand why we were not being allowed to do these audits. Because from what I've heard in the past few days in the Zondo Commission, I was not shocked. I said, oh, that's the reason why we were not allowed to come and verify, because we would have revealed that the locomotives are not being built by components that are being procured in the country. They are being built by components that are coming outside the country. That's what they didn't wanted us to see. But we're hoping that from that commission, lessons can be learned and we can move and start to implement the policy as it is. The other issue that many people ask me, and I'm sure you will if you get an opportunity, that if you know that the following companies did not adhere to this policy, so what was difficult for them to be punished? My last bullet point speaks to that. Again, my comfort is that the new minister is now looking at, if he finds out that something has been procured outside the policy, what is the punishable measures that will be taken against that company? Because a lot of tenders have gone out to the wrong people. They've taken the money, they've run away with the money, but there are no mechanisms to say you did not comply and this is what's going to happen to you. And it has been a gap since the introduction of this policy. And I think it will be a challenge even in the mining space that, so what will happen to those who will decide not to comply? And it should be a debate and a comment that I'm hoping somebody has probably raised it as the document is still in draft, that, so what's going to happen if I decide that I don't want to comply to this thing? And we need to have that debate now so that when it gets implemented, we all know where we stand. Then I've been saying a lot of negative things about how badly we've tried to implement this policy. I get so excited when I then, in that moment, encounter somebody that says it can be done. Somebody that says, I am not going to wait for the mining charter to be published. I will test myself with the draft and see how far I am, so that when that charter becomes a published document, I don't get surprised. If the percentages are revised up, I will probably have a small little things to do to comply. If they are revised down, it means I will be over complying. I will just smile and say, I've done it and I'm ready. And it was so pleasing when the company that has brought us here approached us. Firstly, I thought, are these guys crazy? Why do they want to be checked on a draft document? Why can't they wait until it is finalized? But they said, Frank, we know that even if it is revised, it will be the percentages that will be revised. But the policy itself in terms of localization, it will be there. We don't want to wait until it is finalized. We want to test ourselves with this draft. And for that, I think we need to give Multotec a round of applause for what they've done. They have the certificate hanged on there. They have gone through the process. They have experienced what it takes to go through this process. And I can gladly tell anyone and say, this company, when it comes into localization, they don't talk about it, they have done it. And can you imagine if all of us, if Transnet did the same, if PRASA did the same, if ESCOM did the same, if SABC did the same, if SAA did the same? It pains me when you look at the uniform that the people are wearing and you look carefully, it made in that country. Yet there is somebody who is shutting down a factory in KwaZulu-Natal because he or she is no longer getting orders to sustain the business going forward, and therefore laying down 100 people because there's no money coming into the organization. But we gladly procure those uniforms from that country and generate job opportunities in other countries. Competition is fine, but we're saying charity begins at home. As we compete, don't forget that you have a small little guy somewhere who also produces the product. Then try to make a balance that as you buy something there, but you don't forget that there is somebody in your local space that is producing the same product. If we can all do that, not even expecting companies, I always say, some of us who travels a lot, we are also guilty as charged. I would leave a cap that is produced here from a guy standing in a corner and be proud when I come back from that country or that country and say, you see this cap, I just visited this country and it was $2. And we proudly say that. And there is a guy there standing in a corner with the same cap saying, please, for me it's 10 rand, it's not even $10, it's 10 rand. Just buy it from me, so that we don't do that. We don't support our own people and we expect somebody else to do. If it can begin with us in our space and saying from now onwards, these little things that I use in my house, let me just make sure that I buy it from a local guy around my area so that he can keep those 4 people that he's currently employing and make sure that they also get something for a living. It all begins with a small step. And for that, ladies and gentlemen, I thank you for listening.